And I'll begin with my opening remarks. This is a briefing, so some of the protocol issues we have, we don't have to deal with it. We deal with a hearing. So I just want to start by welcoming everyone, thanking you for flexibility in readjusting your schedules so you could be here for this public briefing on what we have entitled Truth, Accountability for Victims of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. To our briefers here today, again, your input is very important, and we're honored to have you speak with us in this important issue. Your words will certainly provide actual color and nuance to a critical conversation on the continued importance of the Good Friday Agreement, as well as a harmful piece of domestic legislation currently making its way through the UK Parliament that threatens peace and stability that has been brought to the region. And now, as we experience an uptick in some of that, threatens the very effects of the Good Friday Agreement. This briefing is coming at a unique time of political instability in London. However, the enduring nature of the crimes committed during the Troubles, the uncertainty caused by these crimes, and the brazen nature by which the UK government has moved forward with their draft legislation on amnesty makes this briefing all the more relevant. Now, almost 25 years ago, on April 10th, 1998, representatives from Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom agreed on a shared path forward for enduring peace with avenues for cooperation across the island and across the Irish Sea. This historic agreement ushered in the beginning of a new era and marked the closure of a violent and traumatizing chapter of regional history. I specifically remember reading about the violence and the killings that took place on Bloody Sunday in 1972 and throughout the Troubles when I was a college student in Boston. Even today, the crimes committed 50 years ago remain unsolved and unaccounted for. A gross act of discreditation to the victims, and importantly, to the victims' families. As part of my work to ensure accountability for these crimes, I introduced, with 50 bipartisan co-sponsors, House Resolution 888, which condemned the killing of 14 individuals and the violence that took place on Bloody Sunday, calling on all parties to take meaningful steps towards peace and reconciliation. The resolution, which passed the House on St. Patrick's Day, ironically, of this year, specifically urged the UK to support the prosecution of individuals who committed unjustifiable crimes on Bloody Sunday and implored all actors to participate in good faith with regards to issues impacted by the Good Friday Agreement. Unfortunately, on the issue of amnesty, the UK has recently taken drastic steps towards establishing a scheme that prioritizes amnesty for crimes committed during their Troubles. This legislation will provide immunity, that is in reality an amnesty, to individuals who cooperate with the new commission, as well as prevent future prosecutions under certain circumstances and all future civil claims. This approach not only impedes any accountability for those who committed the crimes, but also whitewashes history in the name of information recovery. While information recovery is certainly important, this legislation does not comprehensively ensure accountability for the crimes committed during this time. The legislation fails on that account, sets a dangerous precedent, and squarely threatens the Good Friday Agreement itself. Finally, I want to acknowledge the importance with so much uncertainty regarding both the protocol and amnesty. A special envoy will help ensure the U.S. can play a positive role in upholding the Good Friday Agreement and facilitating peace through cross-community dialogue and a measure that was called for in the Good Friday Agreement, civic forums. In the interest of time, I want to close by saying that I wholeheartedly stand with the victims groups, families, and victims of the Troubles in both nationalist and unionist parties in Northern Ireland, as well as many others, in opposing this harmful legislation. As a member of the US Congress and as a good faith mediator in the spirit of the historical role of the United States. I hope this briefing will help facilitate a discussion that will lead to adequate outcomes for accountability for all parties. With that, I'll now see if Representative Cicilline wants to have a brief opening statement as well.
Thank you, Chairman Keating. I just want to associate myself with your remarks and to say thank you to our briefers. I had the privilege, as you did earlier, of meeting with a representative from the Relatives for Justice, and to want to just very directly condemn this just outrageous piece of legislation that I think will undermine a very important effort to keep peace and stability in Northern Ireland, something that's of keen interest to the United States, and look forward to hearing more from our briefers, but thank them all for being here.
Thank you, Representative. I'll now introduce our briefers. And again, thank you for being here. We'll begin with Dr. Anna Bryson. She is a senior lecturer at the School of Law at the George J. Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security, and Justice at Queen's University in Belfast. Dr. Bryson, we recognize you for your remarks, and thank you again for participating in this.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to try and share. Are you happy for me to proceed, Chair? Was my opening remarks? Yeah.
We're welcoming it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just hope that I can share my screen effectively. Are you able to see those slides?
We are. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. So in the hope that it might be helpful, Chair, I have set out on a few slides a little bit more by way of background that will put some flesh on the remarks that you yourself have just made. So I suppose just by way of introduction to my own role in all of this, I've been working since 2014 as part of what became known as the Model Bill Team, so-called because we developed draft legislation around the implementation of the Stormont House Agreement. But essentially, we've been working to try and provide free legal and technical advice to interested parties. And we've briefed a number of forums such as this and organised conferences, seminars on key challenges that have arisen around legacy issues. And we've published reports, most recently, of course, on the bill that's currently making its way through Westminster. I suppose I thought it might be helpful to invite members to take a step back and remember just how much work has gone into grappling with these difficult legacy issues. Right back to 1998, as you all know, we weren't able at that point with the Good Friday Agreement to agree a holistic package of measures to deal with legacy issues. Instead, we've had this piecemeal approach. We've had public inquiries, inquests, the Disappeared Commission, and so forth. And recognizing that that was not ideal, we've had a number of attempts to pull it all together. And through that Healing Through Remembering report, which grappled with various accommodations between truth, justice, accountability, the heavy lifting of Eames Bradley, Haas O'Sullivan, right through to the Stormont House Agreement, an awful lot of work and negotiation has gone in to arriving at what we think was a reasonable set of compromises around truth, justice, and accountability as reflected in the Stormont House Agreement. We finally had a public consultation on that bill in 2018. 17,000 people responded. There was no broad public support for an amnesty. There was broad support for the implementation of the agreement. And in 2020, with the restoration of devolution, we had the New Decade, New Approach agreement that got the executive here back up and running with a deal, a commitment to bring forward legislation within 100 days. And then to all of our shock and horror, in March 2020, we had a written ministerial statement from the UK government that signalled an about turn, a unilateral abandonment of the Stormont House Agreement, which, as you know, was underpinned by an international treaty with the Irish government. And it was linked to a sweeping amnesty. And my colleague Louise Mallender has a database of all of the amnesties post-1945. She considered that this amnesty was more sweeping in scope than that introduced by the dictator Augusto Pinochet. We have now in this recent bill moved a little bit back from the sweeping amnesty, but what is being put forward, as you will know, many regard as a de jure amnesty. The background, the immediate background to this about turn, it's worth remembering, the context really takes us back to a groundswell within elements of the Conservative and Tory parties seeking better outcomes, as it's called, for veterans. So essentially pressure from what's sometimes dubbed the military wing of the Conservative Party, But worryingly, this is linked to false allegations about a witch hunt against British Army veterans, because it simply doesn't stack up. If you think of the rhetoric around a witch hunt, people being hounded, and you consider what number of successful prosecutions might merit that kind of rhetoric, I don't know what you would think, 38, 72, the answer is 0. There's not been a single successful prosecution of a state actor, and there's been a handful of prosecutions. So it simply does not tally with the statistics. Instead, I think you see the real intent behind this bill set out in a blog by Secretary of State for Northern Ireland last month, when he reassured people that this bill will ensure that no longer will our veterans be hounded and hauled in for questioning. Now, it's difficult to square all equal before the law, a commitment to independent investigations, when in the same breath, you're reassuring some sections of our population that this is essentially a get out of jail free card. And this has been linked to worrying rhetoric around legacy lawyers. And this takes us back to the darkest days of our troubles, when we had statements in the House of Commons about lawyers being sympathetic, as was stated then, to the IRA, and subsequent to that, the murder of human rights solicitor Pat Finucane, whose family are still campaigning for a public inquiry. So the key features of the bill then, and you've mentioned this, Chair, in your opening remarks, we have immunity from prosecution for troubles-related offences. The bar could not be set much lower. You simply have to attest that you've told the truth to the best of your knowledge and belief, and then you must be granted immunity. There'll be an end to troubles-related civil actions, inquests, the work of the Office of the Police Ombudsman, Canova investigations, and so on. And all of this has caused us to question, recognising the limitations of the existing package of measures, we've begun to wonder whether the existing criminal justice measures have perhaps been working rather too well, because we're grappling to try and understand why you would say to families who've been waiting decades for an inquest, the door's closed, no to civil actions, and so forth, and reaching far and deep into our courts in so doing, and again, rupturing key cornerstones of the Good Friday Agreement and the devolution of policing and justice. This new independent commission and reconciliation recovery body is, we feel, incompatible with Articles 2 and 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, and again is thus an assault on the Good Friday Agreement, because, as members will be aware, the incorporation of the European Convention on Human Rights into our domestic law is key to the Good Friday Agreement. I have worked in the area of oral history memorialization, and there I'm really concerned that in a space where very important good work could be done around intergenerational trauma, around reconciliation, there's a rather cynical attempt to beef up these proposals on oral history memorialization as legal cover for the de facto amnesty, because they're saying this is evidence of a reconciliation process. And in the memorandum on compliance with the European Convention on Human Rights, there is a link between these oral history proposals and the space that the UK government thinks it can identify for a lawful amnesty if it's linked to a reconciliation process. The jurisprudence is not extensive and it's not clear, but I see that as a very cynical attempt to use this as a smokescreen. There's also worrying direct government control over all aspects of these proposed mechanisms, with the Secretary of State making the appointments, regulating the governance of the work, issuing guidance on immunity, redacting reviews, and so forth. The reaction, not surprisingly, has been almost unanimously negative. Our own view is that it's unlawful, immoral, and setting a very dangerous international precedent at a time when respect for the rule of law on the global stage, as you will be well aware, could not be more important. We have a democracy nestled in Western Europe, flying in the face of binding international agreements and the rule of law in a most worrying way. And of course, opposition from victims and survivors, from whom you will hear in a moment. That all of the political parties here, the Irish government, the Council of Europe, the Human Rights Commissioner has come out very strongly, roundly condemning these. The UN Special Rapporteur will make a statement shortly. And of course, we greatly welcome interventions from your side of the Atlantic, including from the Ad Hoc Committee to Protect the Good Friday Agreement and in letters to Secretary of State Blinken. Finally, in terms of what can be done, I suppose in our model bill team, we've been urging the Irish government to consider the possibility of taking an interstate case to Strasbourg around ECHR compliance. There will no doubt be independent legal action from organisations, perhaps the Irish Human Rights Commission, who made a very helpful statement yesterday, again stating their belief that these proposals do not comply with Articles 2 and 3 of the Convention on Human Rights, and other victims may well in due course take action. I fully anticipate that the Council of Europe and the UN and other bodies will subject these proposals to ongoing scrutiny. And again, as I said, we greatly welcome the continued support, as reflected in the opening remarks of Chair Keating, the continued support that reflects for the rights and needs of victims and survivors and efforts to protect the Good Friday Agreement. Speaker Pelosi, I think, has helpfully linked the prospects of a US-UK trade deal to compliance with the Good Friday Agreement. And indeed, we feel that, applying pressure on the international stage, for example, UK comes before the UN Human Rights Council later this year for the Universal Periodic Review, asking probing questions of this legislation would again be most welcome. And so we thank you for what you have done to date, and we thank you in advance for what I know will be continued and robust support. So I hope that was helpful by way of background.
Well, I want to thank you so much. We've been joined by several members of Congress that are with us now. We have Representative Brian Higgins from New York. We have Representative Mary Gay Scanlon from Pennsylvania. We have Brad Schneider from Illinois, joining again with Representative Cicilline. We had, I don't know if he's still there, he's not on the screen, Representative Jamal Bowman from New York. So I'd like to welcome you all. We're now going to hear from our second briefer, who's Mr. Alan McBride. He's the coordinator of Wave Trauma Center, the largest cross-community victims group in Northern Ireland for families and individuals bereaved and injured by the Troubles. So I recognize Mr. McBride, and thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for having us, and thank you again for the spotlight that you have placed again on this incredibly important issue. And we do hope that you're able to, bring some leverage on the British government to reverse the plans that they have to deal with legacy. As I was listening to Anna there, I sadly have been involved in most of the things that she was talking about, as has Mark and indeed others. It seems like we've been engaged in this conversation for a lifetime, and the conversation seems to be a circular conversation. It seems to just go round and round, but doesn't really go anywhere. And every time we seem to be going to the negotiating table to talk about these issues, we always inevitably come away with substantially less than what we had on the previous initiative. So if I was to cherry pick all of the agreements that we've had to date, I suppose for me it would be James Bradley. I think was the most, for me, extensive set of measures. Of course, they all recognise that there's no one size fits all, and that different people need different things, and so they've all come up with a menu of options. And the Stormont Agreement, which wasn't as good, I don't think, as James Bradley, wasn't also as good, I don't think, as the House of Sullivan. But for me, it kind of represented the last straw, really. The sort of, we had compromised as much as we were going to compromise, and also as well because it had probably the largest support. I think all the political parties, bar the Ulster Unionist Party, who I think sort of wavered at the 11th hour on it, but certainly up until that point, it had widespread political support, and also the buy-in of the victims and survivors sector. And that's not easy when it comes to dealing with the past, because as a range of NGOs and various groups and stuff like that, we haven't always been together on these issues. And yet I think around the Stormont House Agreement and the legacy proposals contained within it, I think we realised that there was the chance of getting somewhere. So for the British government to effectively drive a horse and cart through that, with in the pretense, of course, of trying to support peace and reconciliation, and they're making the case that, you know, what has been happening in the past hasn't been working. And maybe Anna's got a point when she says that maybe the reality of that is that some of those things, certainly around Canova and stuff, have been actually working too well. And maybe the British government got spooked about some of that stuff. I don't know. But to go through that and to set that up in the pretense of aiding reconciliation when it's really about saving the skins of British soldiers is immoral. And of course, then added to that is because they realised, of course, that legally they couldn't do this without also, you know, affording protections to paramilitary organisations as well, which basically means that everybody in Northern Ireland, you know, that was impacted by the Troubles, that suffered in the Troubles, isn't going to get really what they rightly deserve. And the other thing I'll say, and just today, I'm taking part in this little documentary that's coming out next year for the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, the 25th anniversary. I think it's called Once Upon a Time in Northern Ireland, and I've been part of that. And as being part of that, they asked me if I had any old video footage of my wife who was murdered in the Troubles. And to be honest with you, I knew that I had something somewhere in the house, but from my wife actually sang in a wee gospel band many years ago. And so I finally found this little video. Haven't seen it in about almost 30 years, and I sent it across to them. And literally about an hour ago, the guy dropped it back. He had transferred it into a little pen drive, and I was able to watch it. So I was able to watch it for the first time in 30 years. So, and it brought everything back. You know, my wife was, she was only 28 when this video was taken. My daughter's 30 now, so she was younger than my daughter. And I think it just brought home to me just how long I have lived without her, how young she was when she died, how old I have become. My daughter, as I say, is older than her mother was when she died. And my daughter now is giving birth to my first grandchild. So it's like a whole lifetime really without her. And for me, you know, I got a sense of justice. I mean, the person that murdered my wife was, one was killed when he planted the bomb, and the other one served 7 years in prison. We didn't get the driver. We didn't get the people who carried out the reconnaissance. We don't know really. I mean, there's been rumors about why the bomb was carried out and all of that, but there's a lot of things that are still not settled. But at least I got a little bit of justice. When I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about people that I'm sure Mark knows, and certainly I know, that have never had their day in court, have never been told the truth. And in fact, in some instances, not only have they not been told the truth, but they've had to live with lies that were told about them. And I'm thinking in particular of the Ballymurphy families, for example, and you know, where their loved ones were accused of being gunmen and gunwomen. And there's a lot of that goes on in Northern Ireland where the truth is out there somewhere. The family quite often will know the reality, but they need that officially to be told to them in terms of the official version of that. And for that to be denied families, I just think is immoral. And I think it just brings home to me today, you know, as we're having this conversation, that there's a lot of people, many hundreds of people in Northern Ireland who, if this goes through, and it's looking like it will with the size of the Tory majority, and I don't know if a change of Prime Minister will bring about a change of fortune in that regard. I doubt that it will. But there's going to be many hundreds of people that are going to be left without answers to questions that they've always had. And this is a fight, I have to say to you, that won't end here. I mean, if anything, you know, and I think about the families that we work closely with that disappeared and others, I mean, it's the grandchildren and sometimes great grandchildren that are carrying these fights on. And I suspect this will also be the case in Northern Ireland. So if this is built on the premise of aiding the reconciliation process, I really would have serious question marks around that, because if there's all these gaping wounds out there, you know, and we have a chance to, you know, to treat them, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that we'll be able to cure all of society's ills through any process of dealing with the past, but to leave it untreated or to go about it in this ham-fisted way that the government are proposing, which is based, I think, on a lot of wishful thinking. I mean, the notion that people are going to come forward and engage in these processes, I think, is fanciful, because the reality is, it's not as if, you know, you're saying to them, look, come forward, tell us what you know, cooperate, engage, and we will give you, you'll be immune from prosecution. If the alternative was that if you don't do that, then we're going to go after you and we're going to bring you before the courts and we're going to prosecute you, then that might be a viable choice. But the choice is not between that. The choice is between, cooperate or do nothing, and nothing will happen, because that's been the reality here. There just hasn't been the appetite, the political appetite to go after a lot of these people, and that really needs to change. The message that's going out from this British government is that the death of your loved one didn't matter. It just didn't matter. Who killed her, that didn't matter either. The fact you've had to live with her for as long as I've had to live with my wife, well, that doesn't matter either. We're sorry about that, but it just doesn't matter. And now we just need to draw a line under this. We'll give you some kind of a report of which the Secretary of State, if I understand the legislation right, is able to intervene if he doesn't like what's coming out. And I just think it's all wrong. And I think it's a very, very sad day for victims and survivors. And I think most victims and survivors actually recognize that and realize that. I mean, I think there is widespread both political and societal and civic opposition to this. And if the British government, and the last thing I'll say about this is, if the British government are genuine when they say that they're in listening mode, because that's what they told to us when they came out and met with us, that we're in listening mode. And if everybody is telling them, everybody, don't be going down this road, and they continue to go down this road, then you really have to call into question whether or not they have truly been listening. So the only thing that will make them listen, and if anything, is whatever leverage you guys can come to bring on it, because we know that they're after very lucrative trade deals in the US. That's a prize for them. And I would just ask that you maybe make these things a condition of, dealing with these matters to do with legacy.
Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you for sharing. Unfortunately, your firsthand experience, and again, our deepest sympathy always at your loss. It never goes away, and it's not easy for you to publicly share that with us, but it's so important that you have. Before we get to our next briefer, I wanted to see if I could work in quickly two of our members who are experience a little bit of schedule pressure. If Representative Mary Gay Scanlon could give a very brief opening or remarks, and then we're going to just quickly go to Representative Cicilline, who has a question, and then we'll go back to our briefer, and then and I think Representative Higgins too. So let's take those two, and then if the others, if you could raise your hand electronically, we'll try and fit you in too with the as part of the briefing, so that we're really grateful for our members. We're under great scheduling pressure, and they took great interest in this to be part of it. So quickly, Representative Mary Gay Scanlon, then Representative Cicilline for a question, and then we'll take questions and then go to our next presenter.
Thank you, Chairman Keating. Really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this. So I'm relatively new to Congress, but I've been participating in the Friends of Ireland group since a district that's, I think 20% of the district identifies as being of Irish heritage, and we have a direct shipping line from Cork to my district. So lots and lots of interest in what's going on. I did have the privilege of participating in a CODEL to the EU, Great Britain, Ireland, and Northern Ireland just back at the end of May. And it was really, really interesting as we looked at a lot of the issues with respect to Great Britain's recent legislative endeavors, and kind of got a 360 view on how the Brexit move has impacted Good Friday, et cetera. And we tried very hard to reaffirm the US commitment to being a guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement, and really pressuring mostly Great Britain to make sure that the recent moves haven't undermined that accord. And we're looking forward to celebrating, obviously, next year, the anniversary. So just wanted you to know that we are hearing this, certainly seeing, I think, a little bit of what we've heard on this call with a lack of sensitivity or attention to how some of the movements from London are playing out on the ground, and we'll be certainly attentive to that going forward. So thank you for sharing, and I'm sorry I can't stay later. We had something scheduled here before this had to move. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And Representative Cicilline wanted to put a question
Yeah,
forward.
thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the
Senator
accommodations.
Norton,
And I apologize, the Portuguese ambassadors in my office waiting for me, but I appreciate the opportunity to participate. I just really have a two-part question, not completely related, but the first is, obviously Boris Johnson has announced his intention to resign as Prime Minister, and I'm wondering whether his replacement or likely replacement will affect this process, and whether there are internal disagreements within either of the major parties about this legislation, and just sort of some forecasting on that. Maybe Dr. Bryson is the best person to answer that. And then the second question is, this legislation seems to be a reflection of a lack of progress on the underlying issues. And I'd really like to know your thoughts, particularly Mark and Alan. To what extent are these unresolved issues related to the Troubles continuing to be unaddressed, particularly by the UK government, but also by the government of Northern Ireland, particularly as I think about educational attainment and the responsibility to address those issues. Are enough resources being devoted to breaking down these divisions to help really build the conditions for a lasting and sustainable peace?
And before, if I could, I just want to check in with Representative Higgins to see if you want to ask a question before, or do you want to wait till after this answer, Representative, and then ask?
Please allow the panelists to answer David's questions.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it back to our panelists, our briefers.
You want me to jump in on the first question?
I think you mentioned you first.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks very much for your questions, Representative Cicilline. So, I suppose the first part around whether or not we take any succor in the rupture in Westminster, I don't really see a great deal of room. Certainly, I suppose with rupture, there's an opportunity for us to raise these issues and certainly to impress on the new leader when they're appointed, the kinds of points that we've been discussing this morning. But those that are lining up to fill Boris's boots, I wish I could say that I have great hope that there's going to be a change of heart, but I think there's no room whatsoever for complacency. We will watch very closely and very carefully to see how things pan out when the new leader is appointed and when, we have a cabinet appointed. But I think that it's unlikely that there's going to be any great, there's certainly not going to be any room, as I say, for complacency. I think we'll need to keep full pressure on to counter the false narrative that has been put out there and to defend the rights and needs of victims and survivors. The underlying issues, I don't know, perhaps if Alan and Mark maybe want to address the second part of your question about underlying issues.
Well, if I could just jump in before Mark jumps in. I know Mark hasn't made his presentation yet, so we'll come to that in a moment. If, with regards to the underlying issues, if you mean, is the place any more stable, or are we making inroads into reconciliation? I suppose that's a bit of a mixed bag depending on where you live. We've just come through a marching season and 11th night bonfires in Northern Ireland. I think most commentators are suggesting it's one of the quietest 12th on record, and yet we still had the burning of Irish flags, and we still had the burning of effigies of both nationalists and not even nationalist politicians on those fires. It was great to see the Orange Order come out and condemn those burning of those effigies, but still I think we've got a hell of a long way to go before we can start to realise the kind of peaceful society that we all voted for back in 1998. So yes, there are some good things happening in Northern Ireland, but these issues around dealing with the past, these are the ones that remain to be the hardest to solve, and certainly they weren't really factored in 1998. And as I say, and Anna's pointed out, subsequent attempts to do that right from Eames Bradley to the present day have all proved not to go very far.
Thank you. I think if Mr. Thompson, if you wanted to follow that up.
Yeah, it's just picking up on Representative Cicilline's question. I think, yes, there's been so many attempts to address the past and the legacy of the past. There's total unity between all the political parties in the Irish government and even all the other parties in the island of Britain, bar the Conservative Party, that the best way forward is the Stormont House Agreement, the international agreement that the UK made with the Irish government and all the executive parties in the North. The crux of the matter is that the legacy of the past and how it's dealt with is not a devolved matter to the devolved government in Belfast. It's retained particularly and deliberately by the UK government to shield itself, to use its sovereignty, to shield itself from any examination of the past. So the context of if the parties in the north of Ireland had the ability to move forward and implement their own legislation to deal with this, they would have done it long ago. The blockage is the UK, and it's the UK Parliament. They have primacy on it, and they have not devolved it.
Well, thank you. And I wanted to ask both Representative Higgins and Representative Bowman, if the schedule permits, I'd like to then take Mr. Thompson for his opening statement. Will your schedules permit that?
Yeah, I'd like to, Billy, if I could.
Yes.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Bill, I'm Brian Higgins from New York. First of all, just let me say I was listening very carefully to what Alan McBride had said about the Good Friday Agreement and its 25th anniversary coming up next year. I think we have a tendency to underestimate the power and the significance of that achievement. The Good Friday Agreement was one of the greatest diplomatic achievements in the later part of the 20th century. And primarily because it dealt with the issue of identity. And if you live in Northern Ireland, you have a birthright to identify as Irish, as British, or both. And Brexit can't change that. So I think Brexit was the right answer to the wrong question. And if you look at the political analysis of the Good Friday or of Brexit, it was a demonstration of English nationalism. If you look at the polling in 2011, the English did not want their decisions made for them at Westminster. And when you do a referendum, they become a catch-all for a lot of anxieties. 80% of those who voted in support of Brexit said they would do so, even if it meant the destruction of the Northern Irish peace process. So the question is, the UK, which is made up of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, it's 67 million people, 83% of whom are English. So if you're in Northern Ireland, whether you're a Catholic, a Protestant, a Unionist, or whatever, why would you want to be part of a country that doesn't want to be a part of you? The Democratic Unionist Party did not support the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement, which was a masterful diplomatic achievement led by George Mitchell, who spent 5 years in Northern Ireland, 3 different iterations. They were asking him, why aren't you able to develop a final agreement? He said, well, some nights we talk about opera, some nights we talk about literature, some nights we talk about families and politics, because there's the trust building process that comes along with that. So the Good Friday Agreement, I've watched, and I traveled with Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who said explicitly to every single leader that we dealt with a couple of years ago, unless there is a reaffirmation, a acknowledgement of the Belfast Agreement, there will be no US-UK trade agreement. But we should not allow ourselves to be put on the defensive. The Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, call it what you will, is a treaty filed with the United Nations and defensible through the process of international law. Brexit will never, ever change that. So I just think that when we talk about the Good Friday Agreement, when we talk about what's been achieved in Northern Ireland, a diminishment, almost an elimination of the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So the right to self-determination in Northern Ireland, the birthright to identify yourself as Irish, British, or both. The manifestation of that is if you identify yourself as Irish, you're an Irish citizen, and Ireland is part of the EU. And Brexit can't do anything to change that. The Belfast Agreement is not an internal agreement. It's an international agreement, a treaty filed with the United Nations and defensible within the context of international law. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No. Thank you, Representative Higgins. Representative Bowman, if you could, would you like to hear from Mr. Thompson with his opening remarks, or is your scheduling allowing?
Oh, absolutely. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting this together. Yes, my schedule does allow. I have time, and this has been really great. Thank you so much again for having it. And yes, I'll hang around for a while.
Thank you so much. And finally, Mr. Thompson, you'll be the benefit of all the prior comments, I guess. But I want to thank you for being part of this. And just as a brief introduction, Mr. Mark Thompson is the founding member and CEO of Relatives for Justice. It's an organization providing support for victims and survivors of the conflict. So, Mr. Thompson, please, your remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Keating, and all the representatives for making this hearing possible on the back of our visit. I'd like to also thank all of your staff who've been wonderful in putting this together, and in particular the AOH for their lobbying and making this hearing possible and all the work that they have done. Access to the rule of law is a fundamental tenet of any democracy, not least one emerging from violent conflict, where rights, safeguards, and protections had been deliberately denied, but which, since our agreement in 1998, have underpinned the peace agreement. The Good Friday Agreement, page 1 states, "We dedicate ourselves to the protection and vindication of rights for all." Rights, equality, and justice, protections against future violations are the very spine of the Good Friday Agreement. These safeguards are now gone with this bill. This bill drives a horse and cart through those rights. When examined in detail, it is essentially a blanket amnesty, mendaciously framed as reconciliation. This bill is the very opposite of reconciliation. Such deliberate framing makes it all the more sinister with its menacing objective, which is to deny fundamental rights to justice for victims of egregious violations, and to principally shield, to protect from scrutiny and investigation, UK state forces and their agents within illegal paramilitaries responsible for well over 1,000 murders. It is this very objective that frames this bill front and center.
Well, thank you.
Sorry, I hadn't finished, Congressman.
Okay, no, we had just a brief technical glitch, but we heard just about everything. So if you could continue, thank you.
Okay, the bill, the bill in terms of its understanding, its motivation, is really what it's about. If you understand precisely, it's about protecting state forces and protecting agents. The UK have writ the playbook to their advantage, and it's regardless of the consequences. If we look at what's currently happening in terms of the police ombudsman, in terms of kind of the courts and the inquest system, they are working and they're delivering the families. And that is, as Alan has pointed out, and as Anna had pointed out, that is the very reason why this bill has come into play. So in the context of what the British government are trying to do, they're just trying to cover up. They're trying to kind of use this bill as a shield to prevent any scrutiny of their actions during the course of the conflict. And that's really what's behind it. I'll probably hand over the Congressman Bowman now, because I'm very conscious of the time.
We have Congressman Bowman and Congressman Brad Schneiders are back with us. Congressman Bowman and Congressman Snyder, if questions or remarks, Congressman Bowman, please.
David Cicilline asked a question that I wanted to ask earlier, which is the implications of Boris Johnson stepping down. If someone can comment on that again, that would be very helpful. And I just also want to know, what can we do right now to continue to pound the pavement to make sure that the Good Friday Agreement is recognized, uplifted, and that we stick to it and not allow this new bill to undermine it. You know, this reminds me of some of the issues we're dealing with here in the U.S. regarding reconciliation. We still have not told the truth about our past as a country, and it keeps us from moving forward in the way that we need to as a nation, as the true multiracial, multicultural democracy that we are. So those are just my brief questions and comments.
Well, thank you. And I couldn't agree more that these things do not go away. They only resurface later on to create greater conflict. So take that question and comment, and also Representative Snyder. And for those of you that are our briefers, I just want to recognize that Representative Brad Snyder has just, in his district, undergone a very tragic set of violence victims and families. So he's coming from the issue of victims and families in quite raw and proximate time. So Representative Snyder, would you like to comment or question?
Thank you, Chair Keating, and I want to thank the briefers. Sorry I had to step away. Mr. McBride, we were talking about his family. I have a son who called with an issue, so we leave to take care of our kids, which is what we do. But I appreciate you all sharing your experiences and perspectives. What I guess I'm just pulling from an experience. First of all, Bill, thanks for commenting. I represent Highland Park, Illinois, which you may have seen in the news, had a horrible shooting at an Independence Day parade. And I've been talking to a lot of young people processing the immediacy of that. But I also had a meeting yesterday with a group of young people from opposite sides of a different conflict and hearing their stories. And so I guess my question, just having been around so many young people processing what may have happened in the past, where they are, understanding where they want to go. As we're at this critical juncture, what role are the young people playing, and what might we do to support? Because I really do believe the future rests on giving current and future generations the foundation to stand on to pursue peace without forgetting the past.
Great. So I think the questions to the panel are about the role of young people, and also about, if I could, the role of civil rights in the U.S. We've heard from many Northern Ireland activists that they were inspired by the civil rights movement in the U.S. So if you would like to have the briefers comment on those two things, if you could.
Maybe if I could come in on that, Chair Keating. I think, yes, the transgenerational impact, to give you an example of what's happening in terms of there's the generations of people that are mothers and fathers who lost children. They're an aging population, and many of them are passing away. And it is siblings and nephews and even grandchildren of people killed that are picking up this mantle to deal with it. You know, this bill is drenched in hurt, pain, anguish, and trauma, and it's re-traumatizing people. And the fact that young people are growing up in homes, their lives are framed by pictures on the wall of people that are very much part of their lives, who were killed before they were even born. And they celebrate their birthdays, the Christmas times, their anniversaries, all of those issues. And in the context of that environment, the injustice that continues to be perpetrated by no accountability, by the lies and the mistruths and the misinformation, they have now began to get involved in this issue of justice, and we need to deal with it and we need to grasp it. So it's very important in terms of we understand that newer generations are condemned and consigned to dealing with this because of the failure to deal with it. And the UK government know rightly that this bill will be challenged in the courts, but that will buy time of several years, and it's several years that aging relatives don't have. And the younger generation are looking at their grandparents, looking at their parents and saying, this needs to be resolved now for them. And what the British government doing is absolutely, it's just shameful. And the lies that they're telling in terms of how they frame the bill. So all of that, they're grappling with all of that. And if we ever really want reconciliation and peace, well, then we've got to face into it and deal with it, which is why it's so important to have hearings like this, so as we can exercise some pressure on the UK.
Okay. Well, I think we got most of that.
Thank
you
you. No, I think that's, I don't even know the words. I think what you're saying is critical. And I like the word transgenerational. I didn't thought in that term, but I think that describes it perfectly.
Yeah. Any of the other briefers want to comment on those points by Representative Schneider, Representative Bowman?
I could possibly just add, Chair, that as I mentioned in my presentation, I think it's one of the things that angers me most is that I think there's a lot of good work could be done around transgenerational trauma, around giving people an opportunity to tell their story. And Alan, you've spoken about this, about telling your story in full and in context with all of its complexities. But that work is being thwarted and denigrated because people are alive to the fact that what could happen in that space is being used, it's being instrumentalized, associated with this noxious plan for a backdoor amnesty. And so people don't want to touch anything that's linked to that. So it's actually retrograde what's happening now. It's closing down avenues for good work that, could and should be developed to address those issues, bringing programs through schools, dealing with, all of that. This takes us in precisely the opposite direction, and it adds to the ignominy by dressing it up as reconciliation when no one wants it. And you couldn't possibly say that this is actually in the interests of reconciliation. So I think that cynical part of it is one of the things that really, I suppose, concerns me most, just to add to what Mark has said.
Dr. Bryson, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think Mr. McBride has already addressed that in a very personal way. My own background, as this conversation has come forward, comes into play too. When I was in the state legislature, I was the head of many victims' rights groups, particularly victims of violent crime, child witness to violence. Those are activities that I've been involved with for decades now. And this conversation is bringing that home with Representative Schneider's remarks about young people and the remarks of all three of our briefers. I was also a district attorney afterward, dealing with victims of violent crime. And I had firsthand experience knowing this. And too many people that were district attorneys, I think, with all good intentions, would say at the end of a case, well, I'm glad we brought closure. As I think Mr. McBride's comments indicate, there is no closure ever. But there is one thing. I would say two major things I got from the victims I worked with for years. Number one is accountability, that there's a justice, that those responsible will be accountable. But number two, what I heard time and time again, and I think that's just what you were, where you were going, Dr. Bryson, they want this to be an experience such that no other family has to experience this again. And what we were just saying, I think Mr. Thompson, Mr. Bryson, and obviously firsthand, Mr. McBride, this will be lost if we won't deal with this. And it's not just a loss to those families, but it'll be a loss to other potential victims. Because if there's not accountability, if there's not changes in how conduct occurs and protections for other people, people's rights being recognized, then it will repeat itself. So the two things that I always heard in my own experience, accountability and please do everything you can so another family doesn't have to experience this, will be the things that are lost with this legislation. So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that.
Good.
Sorry, if I could just say, Chair Keating, you're absolutely right. I think what we need to understand about this bill, it is about throwing the Good Friday Agreement under the bus. The Good Friday Agreement gives us agency to use the courts for the first time ever through American support in achieving that agreement. I couldn't agree more. It's the biggest achievement of US foreign policy in decades. And it provided a platform for families to take agency and use the courts. And in that context, what we see is the UK government shutting down the rule of law, shutting down rights, closing. closing down access to justice. And really what we got to do is protect it. Of Alan McBride from the Shankill Road, whose wife was killed by Republicans, and myself, who had a brother killed by the British Army, if we can work together for decades and champion the cause of victims and come across community on that, surely then, there's enough for us to kind of move this forward and for the US to get involved and champion the Good Friday Agreement and protect it, and don't allow the British government to throw the rights away that we've worked so hard to get. We cherish the Good Friday Agreement and we need it protected.
Can I jump in with
Yes.
apologies? My screen froze when you said champion the cause of victims. Could you, I know what you said was important. I don't want to miss it.
Well, what I was saying, Alan McBride's wife was killed by Republicans in the Shankill Road, and my brother was killed on the
Right.
Falls Road by British soldiers. And we come from two different communities, but we've had an experience of loss in the conflict. And if we can work in two organizations coming together in the better interest of all victims seeking justice, irregardless of who they are, who killed their loved ones, that common cause, if we can do that, that's what scares the British government. They don't want that. And they want to keep a sectarian divide, and they want to force their division, and they want to use that to cover up. What we need to say is we need to protect the Good Friday Agreement and the rights and entitlements and the agency that gives families to seek justice. And the courts can work if they're left unhindered. And in the context of pursuing rights and seeing the delivery of a narrative that is very much different to the narrative that the British government said that happened during the conflict, it's being reversed by the courts. That is why they have brought this bill in. That's why they've vested so much powers in the Secretary of State that can overturn all those decisions and lock down law and order. Really what we're doing is locking down the rule of law, human rights, due process, administration of justice and accountability to suit a British government that doesn't want the truth about its actions in Ireland being revealed through due process. And they're running from the rule of law, but they're undermining the Good Friday Agreement in doing so, because that very agreement gives us those rights and entitlements, and they're taking them away. And you have worked with us, representatives in the Congress, in the Senate, and the administrations, bipartisan, to get us where we are. And we can't regress back. We can't go back. And we really need intervention from the US administration and Secretary Blinken to say to the US as an ally, you can't do this. You need to back away, and you need not to act unilaterally, but act in unison and in agreement and honor your agreements.
Thank you. And I apologize, Bill, I have to go. Can we keep this discussion going? What you said was critically important. And, I'll speak for myself. I can't speak for all my colleagues. I come to this with an awareness, but not a deep understanding, as you just laid things out. And I think it's important, and that's why these conversations, a briefing, and Bill, I would say even moving further to hearing, to understand these things really matter. I'll share just briefly personal story. Where you talk about transgenerational. On the wall in my office is a picture of my mother's uncle. Actually, it's my mother's mother and her family. My uncle was murdered in 1943. I'm named after him. I was born in 1961. Obviously, I never knew him. His murder was not sectarian. It was not political. It was a former client who was a lawyer, disgruntled, murdered him. But that pain and death carries over. My mom's 83. That carries over as if it happened yesterday. So, Bill, to your point, that memory is there. That's a personal story. You're laying out something that's much more general. That transgenerational narrative is important, but getting to justice and a broader, in the context of the conflict, is a bigger thing for us to understand and to reach out. So anything we can do, and Bill, count me in, anything I can do to help, I'm on board.
Thank you, Representative. Any further comments? I have some, but I'll pause because my schedule allows. Representative Bowman, anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I would just echo what was just said. Anything I can do to help, count me in. Just put me in, Coach. Let's go fight. Let's go win.
Okay, thank you, Representative. I also want to say a partisan feeling in the U.S. Congress too. When we had to shift the schedule, some of the members on the other side, particularly Representative Fitzpatrick, who's the ranking member, wasn't allowed to do this because of a prior scheduled hearing. But I just want to make you aware of that, number one. But I want to, this has been remarkable as we just try and get to a closure of this briefing, because I never really anticipated the how articulate, the personal and profound way that this has touched the individuals here, and also with Dr. Bryson, with the broader scope of from the legal side, international agreements, international law, what the context is, how this could affect other areas of law, the implementation of law, all those things. We covered so much in a short period of time. But if I could, this hasn't been touched with directly, but we cannot talk about this legislation without talking the politics that surround it too. And on the positive side, I don't know how the results of last May's election can be ignored. Because if you look at that election and you look at the parties that won and the seats that were won, you could do the calculus that almost 60% of the results of that election, if I may, is for the protocol. They weren't there opposing it. So in the political sense in Northern Ireland, this is a minority view, this legislation as well. And it's just not an opinion. You can look to that May election. Now, I don't know if you want to comment on, anyone wants to comment on that aspect as well. About briefers, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose for myself, the May elections, it was a changing of the guard in many respects, because, you know, you had the DUP lost some seats, and I think Sinn Féin stayed the same, but have now become the largest party, and so therefore they have the right to become the First Minister. I would hope that they would show some grace, more grace than the unions would ever show to them. I absolutely take that on board by changing that title and make it the office of the two First Ministers. It just removes the toxicity from it, which has always been there. And the unionists have always used that to sort of to beat the Nashes over the head with. I would just hope that the Nashes wouldn't return the favour, because I think there's an opportunity here. For myself, whilst I think you're right, there was more people that were elected on were pro protocol rather than anti protocol, and I think that's important to say, because whenever you hear the narrative in Northern Ireland, it's almost as though everybody's against the protocol. Of course, that's not the case at all. It just happens to be a lot of unionists, and even within the unionist community, whilst I accept totally that those in the assembly are anti-protocol, certainly the unionist community itself isn't. I mean, I don't know, I haven't done a straw poll, but I mean, certainly I'm from that community, my family's from that community, and none of them really could care less about the protocol. So it's not a live burning issue for the people that I work amongst. But the big success, I think, for me in the election was the growth of the Moderate Alliance Party, and that sort of, you know, non-aligned, neither nationalist nor unionist, but actually people that just want to work the Good Friday Agreement. And we know that in future, you know, the constitutional question about United Ireland or United Kingdom will be settled by a referendum at some point in the future. But for right now, what we need to do is to work the Good Friday Agreement and to try to, you know, improve relationships on this island. Relationships, I have to say too, that have been absolutely soured by Brexit and by you know, the unionist rallies and how they've been just mischief making over the protocol and winding people up and all of that. And I mean, you've seen some of that with the bonfires and the effigies that were being burnt on bonfires this year. So all of that needs to be dealt with as well. Northern Ireland is not particularly a nice place to live right now, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, you know, in terms of the rule of law, I mean, people can still get away with murder, literally. I'm working with some families at the minute, and working actually with a family in Larne at the minute, whose loved ones are being intimidated by a very well-known paramilitary member of the East Antrim UDA, and yet the police are doing practically nothing about it. You know, and that's just one example, and I could count countless others as well.
Yeah, I don't know if you're aware too, and we should have brought it up when Representative Schneider had a point about young people. We had a hearing in our committee where we had as our witnesses 2 young people from Northern Ireland. actually three. Two were here in present. The third was, over video. We also had, a well-known scholar as part of that. But it was amazing still today, because these people, I think, were both in their early 20s, if not late teens. And they both said they lived just a few miles from each other in Northern Ireland at the time. They're studying in the US now. And they said they hadn't had contact or communication with someone that was either Catholic on one side or Protestant on the other until they were 14 years of age. And this is now. This is today. This isn't dating back 25 or 50 years. This is now. And what was interesting with their comments, they said one of the first things that have to be done is actually implement the full Good Friday Agreement itself. Because as we look at it, there's things still not implemented, like the issue we discussed here today. And I do think that civic forums, which was part of that agreement, would be very important as well. So as we look at these issues, we can look at it from so many perspectives. But last February, I was in London, met with Liz Truss, and made the point as strongly as I could. And Speaker Pelosi was with this, we were the same group, and she made the same point as well. The urgency, the word urgency, should be part of this discussion this morning, or this afternoon, depending on the time. Urgency is so important. And at the time I said, we're looking at elections in May. We have to make progress before then, or they could get rolled over into a devolution of the government, as Mr. McBride had just said, where in reality, it's a shared government, but there's titles and there's so much emotion and there's so much politics that could be rolled into that. And unfortunately, we're seeing that happen. So the one word I would say as a part of the conclusion is that we're a little over our time, is the word urgency. We have a new generation that is still living with the pain that's handed down. But I would suggest too, that was worrisome to me in reports. There's another generation disconnected from this, now getting involved in violence. And so by not dealing with this, we've created an avenue where this can be revisited and violence can again start to mount, rear its ugly head if we don't act. So I guess my last word is urgency. And I think we all should conduct ourselves. We'll continue to do this. We've got broad representation within the committee, outside the committee. You've had members here as well. And there's a bipartisan feeling in that regard as well. And I just want to thank you all for being here. We are going to keep the focus on this. It's something that wherever it happens in the world has to be addressed. And I must tell you, when I was in my first years here and I was in the Middle East, and we were talking about some of the conflicts there and the hopelessness that was there, I would point to the Good Friday Agreement during those discussions. And I'd say, don't give up hope. That's what they said in Ireland, in Northern Ireland and UK. That's what they were saying then. It's hopeless. And look what happened. And what a shame that would be if this symbol of diplomacy, of coming together, is lost. And so we're going to keep the fight on here. And we'll be one, I think, that will take a constructive tone. I know that, and I've been on London TV, some people will say, you're holding the threat of having bilateral trade agreements as a threat. And you're taking sides. And one commentator said, because you have an Irish background. And I said, it has nothing to do with that. I strongly support our relationship with UK. It's essential to the progress of democracy. But this is about centers too on the very fundamental civil rights issues that we discussed, the personal issues that we discussed, the lessons that have to be made accountable to go forward. But we also have to understand that in the broader scope, everyone benefits with that. I think, I forget which one of our briefers said this. I wrote it down early on, but I think it might have been, I don't know if it was you, Alan, or not, but you were saying rights for all. The term was rights for all that you used. And this is about everyone's rights, including citizens of UK. Because and I think Dr. E brought this up as well, we have rule of law. It's there to protect everyone. And if that is diminished, everyone loses. There's no other side to that issue. So as we go forward, this has been very constructive and very personal and poignant, but I hope you come away with the feeling, our briefers, that the torch is going to continue to be lit on this issue here in the US and in Congress. So thank you so much. Again, thank you, Representative Bowman. You stuck right to the end. I appreciate that. And with that, we'll adjourn this briefing with our gratitude.